Well, welcome once again to Take 5, our 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. Yesterday I began telling about how the Solid Rock Church began here in Drogheda with a series of meetings at a nightclub attached to the Linen Hall bar, and how the theft of my wallet left me on my own with no resources. And what happened was, after that, I would come into Drogheda, I would talk with people, and gradually we were able to get a little premises. It was a former fishing tackle shop called Tacklemate down on the Quays. It's now an Italian restaurant, I believe. And then we got kicked out of there. We were a few weeks one place, got kicked out of there somewhere else. And then we went several months with not holding any meetings at all. We couldn't get anywhere to meet, and it really seemed like our dream of starting a living church for the nations here in Drogheda was going backwards rather than forwards, until we came to this place, Old Abbey Lane. Now let me tell you the story behind this, because way back when I was in England and I knew God was calling me here to Drogheda, I really was in a place where I wanted a word of confirmation from God. And we had a guest preacher came to our church in England where I was serving as the assistant pastor. And he was an Australian guy who kept contacting us and saying he wanted to preach in our church when he was in England. And you know what, we'd never heard of him, we don't know who he was, but he kept asking. So in the end we thought, let's give the poor guy a chance. This poor Australian guy probably never gets to speak any reasonable churches. We'll give him a chance. And that was how Brian Houston came to speak in our church. Now, Brian Houston, of course, is today known as the pastor of the Hillsongs church in Australia. But back then, Shout to the Lord hadn't been written yet, and Hillsongs didn't exist yet. But he was pastoring something called the Hills Christian Life Centre in Sydney, Australia. And I remember Brian came and spoke in our church, and while he was speaking, he called me out to the front and prophesied over me. Now, up to that point, he hadn't spoken to me. He hadn't heard me speak. As far as he knew, I was just another English person in an English church. But he prophesied over me, and he said, God's going to take you back to your homeland. And I'm like, wow, how does he know this is not my homeland? How does he know I'm not English? But his next words just blew me away. He said, and God's going to put on you the same spirit that he put on St. Patrick to start churches. Wow. Now, for an Irishman, I'm listening. And so that word was a confirmation that God did indeed want us to come here to Ireland. And the reason we chose Drogheda was, I'll be honest with you, it's because it was one of the most depressing places we'd ever visited, and we thought this place needs a church. But we found there were good people here already preaching the gospel, already trying to share Jesus with people, and we were able to connect with them. And two of those people were Noel and Agnes Joyce, and they owned a premises behind me here, and they allowed us to use their basement. And so we began meeting in there, we began preaching the gospel. And I'll never forget that there was a rough patch on the floor, and I asked Noel what it was. He said, oh, there was an old well there. And what happened was we were afraid somebody might fall into it, and so we bricked it up. And that set me thinking. I came outside and there was a plaque in the street outside. And I tell you what, let's just go now and have a quick look at that plaque. This is the plaque. This is the plaque outside the building where the Solid Rock Church began, where the ministry of the Church of God denomination in Ireland began. And it says that this was at the time of St. Patrick, who baptized the townspeople at a well nearby in 433 AD. And here we were over 15 centuries later, starting our church on the very spot where Patrick had first preached the gospel in Drogheda. And you know what? It was such a wonderful confirmation. We'd received a word about the Spirit, the same Spirit that indwelt St. Patrick would be at work in the church that we would plant here. And here, this was just a confirmation. We were right on this very same spot. In fact, our pulpit sat on top of that bricked up well. It was such a confirmation from God. Can I tell you that the word says this, that God confirms his word out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. We had a prophetic word from Brian Houston, and God confirmed that word. And there's been times since when it's been tough, and there's been times when we've struggled and really sometimes had to hold on by our fingernails. but we've known that God is with us because he confirms his word out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And I pray that whatever you are doing today for him, that God will give you a confirmation word, that you will know you are on the right track, and that he is ordering your steps for you, and he is going to direct your paths. May God bless you. Join us please again on Monday for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.